Canada is furious, not merely disappointed or concerned, but genuinely enraged with Donald Trump and his disgraceful regime. The message from Canada over the past several months has been unmistakably clear, yet Washington has deliberately chosen to ignore it. Canada warned Trump once. Canada warned him twice. And now, with every warning dismissed, Canada has taken decisive action to outmaneuver, checkmate, and defeat the United States on the global geopolitical chessboard. You need to understand that this is no longer the friendly, neighborly relationship we once knew. This marks the beginning of a new world order, one in which Canada works shoulder to shoulder with China, aligns closely with Europe, and cuts the United States out of the game entirely, while also strengthening ties with South America and Africa. Yes, Donald, there are other countries in this world, and they are no longer afraid of you. While Trump remains consumed by delusional fantasies of invading Greenland and crowning himself the dominant predator of the Western Hemisphere, Canada has been quietly tightening an economic noose around America's neck. The bombshell news is now official. Canada has signed a $1 trillion trade agreement with China. This is not speculation. It is confirmed following the stunning state visit by Prime Minister Mark Carney to Beijing in recent days. Carney met with Xi Jinping and China's top ministers, where they unveiled a plan that will fundamentally reshape the balance of economic power in North America. Canada announced it will roll back tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles in phases, immediately allowing 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada at most favored nation tariff rates, around 6%, a staggering contrast to the tariff wall Trump is attempting to build. In exchange, China will reduce tariffs on Canadian canola and other agricultural products. But that is only the surface. This agreement is part of a far broader partnership that will bring massive Chinese investment into Canada's liquefied natural gas sector, allowing Canadian energy companies to profit from Chinese capital rather than relying on a U.S. market destabilized by Trump. This is especially significant as Trump continues to posture as the self-appointed emperor of Venezuela, propping up authoritarian figures like Delcy Rodriguez while betraying democratic leaders such as Maria Corina Machado. China and Canada have a plan, and the language Prime Minister Carney used in Beijing was unmistakable: a new world order. That phrase may enrage Trump's populist base, but Carney doesn't care, because he is describing a reality in which global trade no longer revolves around the US dollar or the whims of the White House. Let's drill down into the details of this electric vehicle agreement, because it directly affects your wallet and your job if you live in Michigan, Ohio, or any US auto manufacturing state. Prime Minister Carney went into specific detail about this deal, and what he outlined amounts to a death sentence for American auto dominance. The figure of 49,000 electric vehicles represents China's initial export cap to Canada. Carney cleverly framed it as a return to 2023 levels, before tariffs were imposed, and emphasized that it accounts for less than 3% of Canada's total auto market to calm domestic concerns. But his third point was the real knockout punch. An increasing share of these vehicles will be in a new market segment, electric cars priced under $35,000 at port. You cannot find a US-made electric vehicle at that price point with comparable quality. Canada is opening the door to a wave of affordable, high-quality EVs flooding the North American market. And the fourth point, which Carney himself called the most important, is the beginning of talks for Chinese investment in Canada to manufacture vehicles locally. Imagine BYD or NIO factories opening in Ontario, partnering with Canadian firms, using Canadian minerals, and selling cars to North American consumers. This neatly bypasses every trade barrier Trump is trying to erect. He can slap tariffs on cars imported from China, but what does he do about cars built in Canada, a USMCA partner? Trump has threatened to tear up that agreement, but Carney is already one step ahead. He is turning Canada into the gateway for Chinese technology into the West. This is a massive win for Canadian consumers looking for affordable vehicles, but for Detroit, it is a nightmare. U.S. automakers, already struggling with high costs and a slow transition to EVs, will now be forced to compete with vehicles built just across the border, backed by Chinese capital and technology. Carney isn't just opening the market. He's inviting America's biggest competitor to plant its flag in our backyard, and he's doing it with the confidence of someone who knows the United States is weakening itself. Trump said he doesn't want Canadian cars and wants to isolate Canada's auto industry. And Carney's response is simple. Fine. If you don't want us, we'll go with someone else. And that someone else just happens to be Trump's worst nightmare. But the shock doesn't stop with electric vehicles. Now let's talk about energy, the lifeblood of the global economy. Mark Carney has declared that by 2030, Canada will be producing 50 million tons of liquefied natural gas annually, and all of it will be shipped to Asian markets, especially China. Canada is developing its oil and gas reserves among the largest in the world to become the lowest risk, lowest cost, and lowest carbon energy supplier on the planet. Last June, Canada exported its first LNG shipment to Asia, and it is now scaling up at a staggering pace. The strategic implications are enormous. For years, the United States tried to position itself as the world's primary energy supplier to maintain geopolitical influence, but now Canada is taking that role in the most critical market of all, Asia. While Trump plays a reckless shell game with Venezuelan oil, trying to loot resources from an unstable, corrupt state, Canada is building a stable, legal energy pipeline directly into the world's second-largest economy. Canada will become extraordinarily wealthy and secure as a result of these moves, using its natural resources as a diplomatic weapon to guarantee its position in the emerging world order. The contrast could not be clearer. Carney is executing careful, systematic agreements rooted in multilateral trade, sovereignty, cooperation, and mutual respect. Canada is deliberately moving past old conflicts. Remember the Huawei CFO arrest that triggered a major diplomatic crisis between Canada and China at the request of the U.S. That was a serious confrontation, yet Canada chose to put it aside in the national interest. They understand that following the United States under Trump only leads to damage. And what is Donald Trump doing? Yesterday he stood at a podium shouting, "I am the tariff king. The tariff king has done a great job," begging the Supreme Court to rescue his reckless policies and declaring, "Shame on our country if we lose." He calls himself a king while the real economy is being hollowed out day by day. Trump threatens tariffs on Greenland, on Germany, on anyone who refuses to support his delusional invasion fantasies. He boasts about slapping a 25% tariff on Germany, 7 times what they pay for medicine, and calls that strength. The world sees it as madness. Carney sees that madness and chooses the opposite path: cooperation, investment, and alliance building. The result is that Canada is emerging as a new energy superpower, while the United States is turning itself into a lonely, isolated bully. When asked directly about the concept of a new world order, Mark Carney did not dodge the question at all. His response was a blunt indictment of American leadership. He said the world is still defining what that order will look like, but at its core is a fundamental question: who will govern global trade? What role will the WTO play? How important will bilateral and multilateral agreements like the TPP or deeper integration with the EU become? He used polished language like the architecture of a multilateral system, but the real meaning was unmistakable. The old US-led system is being eroded and carved away. The only question now is what replaces it. Carney spoke about alliances of like-minded countries, and this is crucial. Like-minded does not mean agreeing on everything. It means alignment on specific domains such as digital trade, agriculture, and climate finance. He was explicitly saying that Canada may disagree with China on human rights while still cooperating on clean energy and financial systems. This is ruthless pragmatism. Carney is outlining a future where rules are no longer written by the IMF or the WTO, institutions where the United States holds veto power, but by smaller, more flexible coalitions built around sector-specific cooperation. He referenced the evolution of the global financial system, the long-term role of the Chinese renminbi, and the expansion of cross-border payment mechanisms. These may sound abstract to the public, but to financial elites, they are seismic signals. Carney is openly gesturing toward de-dollarization. He is preparing Canada for a financial world in which the US dollar is no longer king. When a former governor of both the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada speaks seriously about the future role of the renminbi, it signals that American financial dominance is approaching its endgame. Canada is hedging, diversifying, and refusing to place all its bets on Donald Trump. And this new world order does not include an isolated, aggressive, tariff-obsessed United States. It includes countries willing to trade, cooperate, and compromise. Carney is positioning Canada as a bridge between East and West, while Trump is turning America into a besieged island surrounded by tariff walls. To understand the domestic impact of these moves inside Canada, we need to listen to voices like Charlie Angus, who is leading the Midas Canada resistance movement. Speaking from Edmonton, the heart of Western Canada, traditionally more conservative but now undergoing a seismic shift, Charlie called this agreement a true game changer that will shape Canada's economy for decades. It came immediately after Pete Hoekstra, the MAGA-aligned U.S. ambassador, went on Montreal radio and arrogantly declared, "We don't need anything from Canada." That statement was the breaking point. Canada's response was simple: "Fine, so be it." And the result was the China deal. Charlie pointed out that Carney secured massive concessions for Western Canada, especially access for canola exports. While American farmers in the Midwest are being crushed by Trump's loss of the Chinese market, Canadian farmers are reclaiming it. This represents a direct transfer of wealth from U.S. farmers to Canadian farmers caused entirely by Trump's policies. The EV agreement is equally significant. Charlie argued that introducing high-quality $30,000 electric vehicles into Canada will fundamentally reshape the market. More importantly, it prepares Canada for the worst-case scenario, Trump following through on his threat to sever Canada's auto industry. Canada's auto sector has long been deeply integrated with Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky as part of a North American manufacturing ecosystem. But Carney is signaling that this ecosystem is effectively dead. If Trump pulls the U.S. auto market away from Canada, Canada will pivot toward China. Charlie predicts Chinese auto factories will be built in Canada, leveraging Canada's enormous advantage in critical minerals essential for battery production. The potential upside is massive. There will, of course, be political risk. Carney will face resistance from traditional auto towns and opposition from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, but he has already begun building new alliances. Western premiers, some of whom have flirted with MAGA maple politics, will now have to think carefully before attacking a prime minister who just delivered a lucrative canola deal to their farmers. We are now approaching a renegotiation of the CUSMA-USMCA agreement. 90% of Canada's trade is with the United States, and Trump has openly threatened to tear that agreement up. Charlie Angus explains that Canada effectively has three options. The first is to endure quietly and hope things return to normal, which is what Canada has done in the past. But with Trump, that strategy is hopeless. The second option is to go all in and confront the United States head-on, betting on who blinks first. Many U.S. businesses are already terrified of the economic chaos Trump is creating, and it's possible the U.S. would blink. But Canada is increasingly moving toward a third option, deciding to stop being a client state of the United States. Since 1988, Canada has been sold the promise that free trade and globalization must be tied almost exclusively to America. Now, the real question is how much Canadians are willing to pay to become a truly independent country capable of defending its democracy and rule of law. Instead of an open border, Canada may build a moat that will be costly. It will be painful. It will cost jobs in the short term. But Charlie argues this is no longer a question for bankers or corporate executives. It is a question for the Canadian people, and Canadians understand the price of freedom. If sacrifice is required to protect democracy and the rule of law, they are prepared to make it. Canada intends to build a country that can sustain itself and trade globally, with China, with Europe, not one that depends solely on the United States. The year 2026 will be the moment Canada decides how much independence is worth to them, and the reality is that Donald Trump has left them no other choice. He has forced America's closest neighbor to seek an alternative path for survival. There are also unconfirmed but increasingly persistent intelligence rumors that the trillion-dollar deal includes secret provisions for intelligence sharing and cybersecurity cooperation between Canada and China, moves that could fracture the Five Eyes intelligence alliance. If Canada begins replacing U.S. technology with Chinese telecommunications infrastructure out of fear of American surveillance under Trump, it would represent a national security disaster for the United States. Canada is also reportedly considering pricing its oil in a basket of currencies rather than exclusively in U.S. dollars, a small but deliberate step toward weakening the petrodollar system. Charlie Angus's message to Donald Trump is a direct slap in the face. Donald, you broke everything. The appointment of Pete Hoekstra, an incompetent figure, as ambassador was a catastrophic mistake. Hoekstra had the audacity to say, "We don't need you," just days before Canada entered historic negotiations with China, and the result was that Canada proved it does not need the United States. Can Trump threaten them again? Of course. Can he threaten their democratic allies? Absolutely. Can he continue kneeling before Putin like a shoe-licking servant of an authoritarian strongman? Certainly, but he will never earn respect. Charlie calls Trump what he is, a criminal and a con artist, and Canada understands that. Trump despises Canada precisely because they see through him. They know who he really is, and they will never bend the knee or kiss the mob boss's ring. Meanwhile, the resistance movement in Canada is exploding. In Alberta, long considered the front line against MAGA-style politics in Canada, a massive recall movement is underway, with citizens going door to door to remove far-right politicians who imitate Trump. Midas Canada events are selling out in under 48 hours, showing just how strong the hunger for democracy has become. From Ontario to British Columbia, Canadians are rebuilding democracy from the ground up, and this is the lesson for Americans: never give up. If Canada can stand up to a giant right next door, then the American people can stand up to an authoritarian threat inside their own home. Let's return to the economic impact, especially on American farmers. When China shifts from buying U.S. soybeans to purchasing Canadian canola, it is a disaster for the American farm belt. Farmers in Iowa, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, many of whom voted for Trump out of blind loyalty, are now watching their livelihoods collapse. Trump promised to protect them, yet he went to war with their largest customer. And once that customer finds new suppliers in Canada and Brazil, they will never come back. Canada is seizing this moment to lock in market share permanently. This is not a temporary disruption. It is a full restructuring of global agricultural supply chains. American crops will rot in storage with no buyers or be dumped at fire sale prices, forcing farmers to rely on government subsidies paid for by your tax dollars. The same pattern is unfolding in energy. The U.S. spent billions building LNG export terminals along the Gulf Coast to dominate Asian markets, but Canada, closer to Asia from its west coast and with lower shipping costs, is taking that market instead. Canada's planned 50 million tons of LNG per year represents 50 million tons the U.S. will not sell. American energy companies will face oversupply, falling prices, declining stock values, and hits to pension funds. These are the direct consequences of Trump turning trading partners into enemies. He believed he could bully the world into buying American goods, but the world simply found other stores, and Canada is becoming one of them. And if you think electric vehicles or natural gas are the worst of it, buckle up, because the real danger zone is ahead. There is something more valuable than oil, more critical than gold, something Trump desperately wants, and Mark Carney controls the key to: fresh water, blue gold. The western United States is running dry. The Colorado River is shrinking. Reservoirs in Nevada and California are at historic lows, and California agriculture is collapsing from drought and mismanagement. In desperation, Trump has reportedly made a shocking demand in private talks. He wants Canada to divert northern rivers south to supply the U.S., treating Canadian water as his property, just as he treats Greenland as his backyard. Carney did more than say no. He turned water into a strategic weapon. Canada quietly passed emergency legislation banning large-scale freshwater exports to the United States on national environmental security grounds, While intelligence sources say Carney is negotiating water management and filtration technology deals with China and India instead. The message is clear. Canada would rather let water flow into the ocean than save a country that threatens it. Trump can print money, but he cannot print water. When California's fields turn to desert and food prices explode, Americans will realize Trump's arrogance severed their lifeline. Canada controls the valve, and it is tightening it. The second nightmare unfolds in the shadows of military and intelligence systems, the erosion of NORAD and Arctic defense. For decades, the U.S. and Canada shared North American air defense, with Canada serving as America's eyes and ears in the Arctic. But as Trump threatens NATO allies and cozies up to Putin, Canada is quietly pulling the plug. Credible reports from Ottawa indicate Canada has begun restricting radar data shared with the Pentagon, instead coordinating Arctic surveillance with European partners, and astonishingly, opening security channels with China to protect the Northwest Passage. As ice melts, that passage becomes one of the most strategic shipping routes on Earth. The U.S. insists it is international waters. Canada asserts sovereignty. Trump threatened to send warships to challenge that claim, and Canada's response was to invite Chinese nuclear icebreakers for joint scientific patrols. Picture U.S. warships entering the Arctic only to face not just Canada, but China. Shielded by international law, Canada is skillfully leveraging. Carney knows the U.S. cannot fight both Canada and China in the Arctic. By internationalizing the dispute, Canada has neutralized U.S. naval power. America is losing control of its most critical strategic backyard and potentially blinding its own early warning system. Finally, there is the brain drain, the Northern Silicon Valley operation. Trump's culture, war against science, education, and technology is driving America's brightest minds north. Canada has rolled out fast-track tech visas allowing U.S. engineers, doctors, and scientists to relocate within 48 hours. Thousands from Google, Microsoft, and even NASA are quietly moving. Vancouver and Toronto are emerging as new tech hubs, draining talent from Silicon Valley. Carney understands that in the 21st century, the most valuable resource is not oil, it is people. He is siphoning off America's future in real time. When new inventions, patents, and medical breakthroughs are created in Canada by American exiles, the U.S. will be left older, angrier, and behind. This is not an invasion with tanks, it is an invasion of intellect, and Canada is winning without firing a single shot. Trump may keep the red hats, but Canada is taking the people who design the future, and that may be the most devastating retaliation of all. What we are witnessing right now is the collapse of the American empire in real time, not because of a foreign invasion, but through self-destruction from within under the hands of a paranoid leader. Canada, our closest ally and most peaceful neighbor, has been pushed so far that it now feels compelled to partner with our greatest rival simply to survive. This $1 trillion agreement is a death knell for U.S. economic dominance in North America. The New World Order Mark Carney is talking about has no place for Trump's America. It is a multipolar world where nations cooperate based on mutual interests rather than fear. And the United States is being left behind, isolated on its own continent. You need to be clear-eyed right now. Don't let the lies about the so-called tariff king fool you. Tariffs are taxes on you, the consumer, and retaliation from Canada and the rest of the world will cost you your job. Look at Canada. Look at how they are uniting and fighting back. Look at Charlie Angus and their resistance movement. If they can do it, so can we. We must take our country back before it becomes a poor, isolated, angry island. Share this information, subscribe to the channel, join the fight for our future. Do not let Donald Trump turn the United States into a failed version of itself that even Canada no longer wants to deal with. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay aware, and keep fighting.